Good. Thumbs up. I would have been here sooner, but Jory sent me to the wrong building.
I did.
So I'm really excited to be here. My name is Doug. I'm going to talk to you guys about my experience with substance abuse, life, addiction, trauma, you name it. I think I've had a vibrant life full of a lot of experiences, and I've walked through a lot of different things in my life, and I'm going to share what that story's been like with you guys for the next little bit, and then we're going to talk about it. I think this is really exciting to be able to meet with a group of people who are young, who are getting ready to go out into the field, and frankly work with people like me, who have had a lot of pain in their life, who have experienced a lot of emotional trauma and suffering, because you guys are the future of this field and in this area of recovery and treatment and all those kinds of things. So, background on me, I'm actually from this area. I grew up in Newburgh, and we moved here when I was 1 year old, and I'm 36 now, so I've been here for 35 years. And we grew up just down the street over here on Hayworth in the apartments, and I was raised kind of by my great-grandma. So I grew up in a home where my dad worked all the time, and my mom was an active substance abuser. She was an alcoholic and a drug addict. She was an IV user. And so I grew up basically being raised by my great-grandmother. I would go to her house in the mornings before school and spend time there. She would walk me to school. You know, I would do my school thing. She would grab me from school, walk me home, do my homework there until my dad either got off work, my dad was a super normie, or I would just be there until somebody came and picked me up, you know. And my life and my childhood were incredibly chaotic. We moved a lot. We were very poor. You know, we were the kids who rented rooms from my parents' friends and who, you know, drove cars. Like, dude, we drove this old Datsun V210. You know, we would be driving down the highway, and my mom would always play a joke on my friends, and she could pull the key out of the ignition, and the car would just keep running down the highway. You know, just stuff like we were those people, you know. And I always remember not having very nice clothes, not being very put together, always having hand-me-downs, and noticing that my friends had things, right? Like their parents had homes that they lived in. They had nice cars that you couldn't pull the key out of the ignition when you were driving down the road. They didn't wear clothes from Kmart and Goodwill, right? They had Nikes, they had all that kind of stuff on. And I remember feeling very much inadequate from a young age and realizing that we were just different then. And I also came with a ton of insecurity, right? Because I grew up in this house where my mom was incredibly emotionally and physically abusive, right? And my dad was always working. He was very much available, and I mean that on an emotional level. He's a pretty dynamic human being. But at that time, he had not grown in that area and was not available to us like that. So we just didn't talk about feelings, right? And when we did, we got our asses kicked, to be perfectly honest. That's what happened. And when we got out of line, we got whooped. You know, like that was literally how we communicated. And so we grew up in that life, and at that same time, I had a couple members of my family who had abused me and were abusing me sexually as a child. And so I was being abused physically and emotionally at home, and then when I would be out of the home, if I wasn't with my great-grandma, the other people in our family that I was with, right, were literally abusing me sexually, physically, and emotionally as well. And I didn't have anybody that I could talk to about those kinds of things, and it certainly wasn't something that we talked about in our house. And as I grew up, you know, what I started doing was really leaning into that connection with my grandma. I just started making it a point to be with her at all times because I was always safe with her. Always, right? She was awesome. She was this 4'11" Jewish woman who had all the energy in the room, and I mean it. She would show up to my little guy football games, and she would be on the sidelines chanting, you know, 2, 4, 6, 8, who do we appreciate? And then she'd scream our team name, and she always had on her little hat. And she was awesome. Never drove a day in her life, never had a driver's license. She literally walked everywhere. And I pretty much just leaned into being with her because she was the one person I was truly safe with in every way. And when I was 12 years old, my dad flew home early from a work trip. He came home, he surprised, you know, kind of came home early. It was my birthday, actually. So he flew home late the night of my birthday. It was April 1st. Which legit is my birthday, 1997, and when he got home late that night, I was already in bed, my sister was in bed, and he caught my mom using drugs the way my mom used drugs. And she had kept a lot of that stuff to a degree secret from him for a long time. He knew she, partied and all that kind of stuff, but he had never seen that kind of drug use and abuse in his home around his kids. And so for my dad, it was an immediate, this is over or you're gonna get help. And so the next day, my mom actually checked into a rehab center the next morning. And she's been clean and sober since that day, actually, since April 2nd of 1997. And that's another part of my story, that my mom has been a member of a 12-step group that has helped change and save her life and has helped catapult our family into a truly different dynamic than it ever really could have been without her effort. Simultaneously, my mom goes into this treatment center. She spends 90 days there. In July, she gets out. And July 27th, 1997, 3 short months later, my grandma was walking to the store right up by Safeway here, and she was crossing the street. And that was before there was an intersection there, and somebody drove through the intersection, wasn't paying attention, and they hit her with their car, and they killed her. And I can remember being 12 years old, and we lived just over here on Everest Street, walking out the front door of our house, and we got a phone call from a local police department saying, hey, we're here, we're at the scene of this accident, and we think you may know somebody that was involved in it. And my mom, of course, we screened all our calls because that was back then, we didn't have cell phones, but we also didn't pay our bills very often. We were those people, right? So my mom finally answers the phone, and they told us where it was, and I remember we got in the car, and we were driving over there. And when we got there, they had already life-flighted my grandma out of there, so we didn't see her or anything, but as soon as we pulled up to the scene of the accident, I could see her purse laying in the middle of the street. And I knew, I knew immediately. I was like, it was grandma. It was grandma. Where was grandma? Where's grandma? We got to get to grandma. And so we drove to OHSU, and they had life-flighted her up, and they told us that it was, basically it was like we got there, we got in the waiting room, and it was one of those, we're gonna know a lot more in the next hour. And it felt like 5 minutes had gone by, and they walked in and they just said, we're really sorry, but she didn't make it. And I just remember being crushed, because I didn't have anybody that I could cry on. And I didn't have anybody that was going to keep me safe. And I didn't have anybody that I could rely on at that point in my life. And I just remember sitting in that room and praying, right, at that time, as a little kid, right? We do what we know, and I remember praying and just saying, please, don't take my grandma from me. Don't leave this lying, thieving, cheating, dope fiend of a mom who beats me whenever she can, right? Don't leave somebody like that and take somebody who's done so much good, who's given me so much good. And I just remember having this moment where I just literally thought, so what's the fucking point? Right? What's the point of being the good kid if life's gonna not be fair anyways? What's the point of going to church? What's the point of getting good grades? What's the point of being a good athlete? What's the point of all that stuff if no matter what in the end, you just get screwed? Because that's what it felt like my whole life had been until that point. That everybody that came along just used me and abused me in some way. And I remember we had her funeral, and I remember standing at her graveside and as long as I could until they made me leave her graveside. I remember everybody had left, and I just stood there and I just kept crying because I didn't know how to let her go. I didn't know how to let go of that woman because she was just so special and she was so powerful. And I didn't know who was going to take care of me, to be perfectly honest. And fast forward into my life, that was right around when of course, dabbling into substance abuse started. So at that age, that was when I started drinking, right? And then I started smoking pot, and then I started taking pills, and I started experimenting with all that stuff because I was in so much emotional pain. There was only one thing that ever made it go away just a little bit, and that was when I put chemicals in my body. And the thing is everybody told me, right? 12, you're not supposed to be drinking, and I understand that logically. But when you're in so much emotional pain and you put something in your body and that pain stops, I think we can all relate. We know how we deal with our pain, right? It's different maybe today. We have cell phones, so I know that when I'm frustrated, I can scroll through Facebook for an hour or Instagram or anything like that because it numbs me, because it keeps me from thinking about what I'm feeling. And that's what alcohol did for me. That's what pot did for me. That's what methamphetamines did for me. That's what acid did for me. That's what mushrooms did for me. I wasn't a specialist. I did not do one drug and just run it into the ground. I was more of a what do you got kind of guy, right? Because all I was interested in was feeling better. I wasn't using to get high. I used to get out of right here, right now, because right here, right now is incredibly emotionally vulnerable. Right here, right now hurts. And I know that if I can get out of right here, right now, I can make the pain stop, even if it's for just a little bit. And so I learned, man, how to mask that behavior. I figured out that the point of getting good grades, that the point of being really good in school, that the point of being a good athlete, that the point of being a good son wasn't because those things amounted to success later in life. It was because they allowed me to keep my secret, right? So if I got really good grades and I excelled in sports and I did my chores and I did my homework, nobody ever asked me what I was up to when I left the house because I was such a good kid, right? He's a good kid, let him go. And then I could go out and I could keep my secret and I could go get drunk and I could go get high the way I like to get high. And that was the deal. And I graduated high school, you know, with a 3.6 GPA and all that kind of stuff. I was a 12-sport athlete, and I was all geared up to go to the University of Oregon because I was going to go out and be somebody. I wanted to study secondary education. I really wanted to be a teacher and a coach because I always wanted to give back to people. And I went to U of O and enrolled. And the crazy thing is I got to college, man, and there was nobody left to put on a show for. I didn't have to do my chores every day so that my parents thought I was doing well. I didn't have to go to class anymore. I didn't even have to get good grades. None of those things mattered. So what I had to do was get high because I still had a lot of emotional pain from all the things that had happened in my life that I had never talked to anybody about, man. I just carried around like this fucking rock on my chest. This weight, right, of guilt, shame, and insecurity that I carried around because I always compared how I felt inside to how you guys looked on the outside, and I never measured up. I was always a step behind. I was always a rung below. And my abuse really spiraled out of control, you know, and that's what happened. And so I ended up homeless at one point. I was selling drugs and doing all the things that we do, and I say we, that I did to stay out of right here, right now. And I mean that. For me, the bottom just kept getting lower. And whenever I would get to a new low, I would reset the bar until I hit that next low. Because I was miserable and I was in so much pain. And so I was into this point where I was homeless. I lived on the streets. I stole food to eat every single day. I would break into people's houses. I would steal stuff from them. I was just a mess. I was a disaster. And I was hiding from my family at that point. And I remember, you know, I ended up getting arrested and I got in trouble. And I ended up getting arrested and charged with possession of a controlled substance. And they put me in drug court, right? And I thought, okay, well, here's my chance. You know, like I literally went to jail and they said, Doug, if we're going to let you out, right? You can't go anywhere near these people and you can't use drugs or alcohol. And I remember thinking, absolutely, like that was horrifying. I don't want to spend another day in jail. I will not do that again. You have my word. That's not going to happen. Straight and narrow from here on out, right? And I left, and of course, what was the first thing I did? Right, I went and found those people because I was scared of what was going to happen to me. And I went and did those things that I wasn't supposed to do because I didn't know how to deal with how I felt. I had no support group. I had no ability to communicate what I was feeling. I had nothing to lean on. So for me, it started another 30 days, right, of just doing the stuff and showing up to drug court and trying to pretend that I was clean and sober. And I'll never forget it. I showed up on the fourth week and the judge just said, Mr. Hildreth, how are you doing today? And I said, great. You know, of course, I'm full of shit, you know, but I know how to put my best foot forward. I said, Your Honor, I've got 30 days clean today. I'm really excited. You know, I'm just really on fire right now. And he said, well, I'm really happy to hear that, Mr. Hildreth. We're going to revoke your eligibility from drug court because the boys upstate want to talk to you, and we're going to take you into custody now because the FBI has brought up charges against you. And I'm like, what? And I'll never forget it, man. They arrested me right there. They took me in, and I was indicted and charged with 15 felonies by a federal grand jury for the things that I had been doing. And for the first time in my life, it was really, really apparent that there was no wiggling out of this. I wasn't going to get any help. And I remember sitting there and for the first time just thinking, I don't want to get high. All I wanted was a fucking hug. I just wanted somebody to hug me and tell me that everything was going to be okay. Not that I was going to be okay, just that somehow this was all going to be okay. Because I was terrified about what was going to happen next. And I spent 9 days in jail, man, and of course, 9 days later, I'd gone to an arraignment hearing, and the DA flat out said, we do not recommend releasing Mr. Hildreth because he's a threat to society. I'll never forget it. I sat there and I was floored. Because, of course, in my brain, I'm like, dude, I'm not a bad guy, right? But if you looked at the list of the things that I'd been charged with and the things that I had done, right? It wasn't things I'd been charged with. I did everything they accused me of. I'm not here to tell you that the system screwed me. I was 100% guilty. And I knew it. When you looked at the piece of paper, it didn't line up with the kid that I thought I was growing up. The little child that I felt like I was inside. And I'll never forget sitting in the courtroom, and 9 days later, man, I got arraigned again and charged with more charges. And I thought, oh my God, like, can't get any worse. And it got better. So here's what happened. I'm sitting in this courtroom, and my parents showed up, and I don't know how they figured out I had court and that I was going to be charged with more charges, but they came and they made an agreement with the judge that during my trial, I could be released to them for 24-hour supervision. 7 days a week, I had to go to work with my parents, they had to take me to the bathroom, right? I was under full house arrest terms, but I could be released into their custody as a full-grown adult. And the stipulation was, though, I had to get a sponsor in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I had to be active in the program. That was a court-stipulated thing. I'll never forget it, man. And I remember thinking, okay, I'll give this thing a shot, you know. And so I of course, like, I was willing to do whatever it took to get out of jail because it was horrifying in there. I cannot describe to you what it does to me, but when I hear the doors shut, when the doors would shut, it would literally set off an anxiety attack inside of me because I would feel trapped. Because I was, right? I felt like a caged animal. I didn't know how to deal with that. I didn't know how to process it. I just knew that all I wanted was out of there. And I remember coming home, you know, I got in the car with my dad, and my dad just looked at me and he goes, dude, if you screw this up, we have to call the police. You can't run, right? Because that's what I did. I was a runner. My dad was just, Doug, you can't run because I got to call the cops if you run. And I just looked at him and I was like, you know what, Dad? I want to say a whole bunch of things right now, but I'm just going to do my best to show you that I'm serious. You know, and so that was December 21st, 2005. I've been clean and sober since that day, right? And I got out, and we spent the next 90 days. I got this sponsor in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I started working the steps. And I had about 90 days until my trial. And we knew that I was going to go to prison. That was the foregone conclusion. And so I spent the next 90 days working the steps and going to meetings and being involved in a 12-step program and really, really engaging and trying to better myself as a human being and preparing for what the next step was going to be. Because I knew that I was going to a place where people weren't going to be interested in living the next right thing, and where people weren't going to be interested in change or growth. And I got through the steps, you know, and at 96 days I went to court, and I took a plea bargain, and I got sentenced to 17 months in prison. And I spent 1.5 years in prison. And I remember going, and I remember standing there at the table just like this and talking to the judge and just letting him know that I couldn't change anything about the way I had lived my life. And that I wasn't going to make any excuses for the things that I had done. But I was going to live my life in a way that nobody else ever went through with the people whose homes I had broken into and the things I had stolen, what they experienced because of my actions. That was the best I could do, man. I didn't know what else to say. That's what I was willing to say, and that's what I was willing to commit to. And I spent 17 months in prison, and I helped them start meetings in prisons where there were not meetings yet. And I worked really hard at calling my sponsor once a week, and I would do my step work with him over the phone, and he was awesome. This guy was incredible. You know, he would literally take the phone call. I would read him whatever I had written out for the week. He would be like, "That's, you know, this is my feedback on that," or whatever. "This is your assignment. Call me on Sunday." And I would call him Sunday, and it was, "Jim, this is, you know, what we worked on this week. What do you want me to work on now?" And for me, it was just, give me what's next, man. Because what I figured out really quickly was that when I did what he suggested of me, when I engaged in the process of acknowledging the brutal facts of my life, right, and looking at the truth of the decisions I had made, what happened was I started to feel better. So when I started to engage in this process of cleaning out the wreckage of my past, what started to happen was I started getting better. I started being able to deal with how I felt for the first time in my life. What he started giving me were tools, right? He started giving me an ability to cope with my emotions. I didn't know that at that time. I was insane, and I mean it. I was the kid, I couldn't stay in right here, right now. I would be tripping about, Jim, I'm gonna be in prison, I'm gonna be doing all this. And he goes, whoa, you don't need to be worrying about that. You need to worry about figuring out how to stay in right here, right now. I don't know how to do that. And he goes, just say out loud whatever you're doing. I was like, people are gonna think I'm crazy. He goes, just say it out loud. So I would walk around my house before I went to prison going, I'm walking into the living room. I'm turning on the lights. I am gonna do the dishes. And my mom and dad, my dad would stare at me with just wide eyes like, oh my God, he's broken. We got him off the drugs and now he's broken. And my mom was like, what are you doing? And I was like, Jim says it's my meditation. That's what he would say. He goes, that's your form of meditation. I just want you to learn how to be right here, right now. And my mom would just laugh. She would literally just say, because she's sober, right? She'd been sober at this point for a handful of years. So she just laughed. She thought it was hilarious. It'd been 8 years for her. And I'm trying not to lose my mind. But what it did was it literally kept me from future tripping. It kept me from spiraling, right, with fear of the unknown. It kept me in right here, right now. And at that time, that was the literal bandwidth of my capability. I didn't have the ability to sit down and write my journal. I have my journals from when I got sober, and they're horrifying, okay? My words are like a 7-year-old child's handwriting, and from 1 minute I'm a victim, and the next minute I'm an assassin. You know what I mean? Like it was just anger or fear. Anger or fear. Those are the only two places I lived because those are the only two emotions I could associate with, right? It's the only thing I knew how to feel. And so I went to prison, man, and I got out, and I'll never forget it. Right? I've been clean and sober since. And I thought, I'm out of prison, I'm gonna lead a life, right? I'm gonna be somebody, I'm gonna make a difference in the world, I'm gonna end up in the AA Hall of Fame. That was my big thing. Like, I'm gonna be the best recovering alcoholic there's ever been. I'm gonna save people's lives, I'm gonna make a difference in the world. And I met a girl, right, at an AA meeting, and everybody knows how this goes. We fell in love, and we had 2 beautiful daughters together. And she was clean and sober, and I was clean and sober, and life was going to be amazing. There was one problem though. I had never told anybody about the sexual abuse I experienced as a child. And I had never dealt with the sexual abuse that I experienced as a child. And when I got sober, I went to prison 3 months later. So I spent the first almost 2 years of my recovery, right, in prison. Well, when I got out, after I met this girl, started to deal with life again, I started having these weird manifestations of inappropriate sexual behavior. So we get married, and I start having affairs. And not 1 or 2, and not occasional. I start getting into long, ongoing relationships in secret. And I thought that it was because I was broken. I thought that because I had done the work, and I mean it, in the 12-step programs. I had been honest. I had even told my sponsor about the affairs, but he didn't know how to help me with that. Nobody did. And I couldn't stop it. It was literally just like when I was abusing drugs and alcohol. I had no ability to shut the behavior off, and I was so ashamed of that behavior. So mortified that somebody was going to find out, that somebody was going to learn my secret, and that I was going to ruin my wife's life, that I was going to ruin our daughters' lives, that I was going to ruin our lives, that I was going to bring embarrassment on my family again, right? What more can the kid who grew up to go to prison do to make his parents look like shit? I know. Cheat on your wife a bunch. Be a shitty husband. Be unavailable. And I did that for 10 years in our marriage. For 10 years. And what happened was, my wife never found out. Nobody did. Because I was really good at presenting my stage character to the world. I was really good at still going to meetings, at still being engaged in helping others with their recovery, at still being a great dad on paper, right? To the outside world. Even to my wife, I was a great husband to her. But I was keeping all of these secrets behind closed doors. And at some point, my wife started to get sicker and sicker. She had stepped way back from the programs, and she ended up relapsing and going back out. And for me, it was a similar time where my abusive and addictive behavior with sex was really spiraling out of control. So it was really weird that we were both spiraling in different directions, unbeknownst to each other, right? Hers was obvious and it was known, mine was not. But what I realized was that really quickly, I was going to be in charge of the lives of two little girls. And I sure as hell did not want them growing up with a man like me as their father. Because I was ashamed of who I was. And I knew that they deserved a better dad than they had. I didn't need them growing up with different women in our house and different people in our house. I needed them to grow up with the kind of man they deserved in their life. And I remember my wife went to treatment and I went to therapy. I'll never forget it. I was at the gym, so we own a couple local businesses now, but I was at my gym working out one morning, and I have a guy that works with us now was there, and it was just he and I in the gym, and he's like, "How are you doing today, man?" And we're not close friends, not even to this day. And I looked at him, and I don't know why, but I just was like, "Dude, I'm really shitty." You know, I mean, he had no idea what was going on in my life, but I was like, "Dude, my life's a shit show right now." So that's how I am. Then he goes, "Well, you know, I mean, if you ever want to talk about it, I'm open to it." And I'm like, "I appreciate that, but this is a little bigger than like sitting down to coffee with a friend kind of stuff. This is, I might kill myself next Tuesday, you know, like big." And he goes, "Well, you know, I'm a therapist, right?" Nope. Had no idea. And he goes, "Well, it would probably be a conflict of interest, but let me give you a phone number to somebody I know that would just be a good fit. She's a great therapist." I said, "Okay, give me the number." And I put the number in, and at that time, I'll just say this, I had somebody who's here with me now. This is my wife now. She was in my life as a friend, and she knew I was a mess. And she kept saying, "You know, you should probably talk to a therapist. You know, you should probably talk to somebody about this stuff that's going on." And I was so arrogant, right? Because obviously I don't have any confidence issues. I was like, you know, I don't really need your input. I'm doing just fine, obviously. Okay, I own a business, I own a house, my kids are fine. Back off, lady. And I'll never forget it, man. So I get to this place where I'm stuck. I got nowhere to go. And I pick up the phone and I call this woman. She doesn't answer. And I'm thinking, if I hang up now, I can say I called. I just had this thought, if you don't leave a voicemail, you're probably never going to call again, to be perfectly honest. And I was to the point where I wanted to stop the behaviors for years, and I couldn't. I would leave from having an affair with someone or engaging in that behavior, and I would cry on the whole way home, tears in my eyes running down my face, knowing that I never wanted to do it again, and I was going to go back as soon as I could. And I just remember thinking, I'm fucking broken. Like, I've done all the work, all the things that you're supposed to do, all the things they tell us that we're supposed to do. So I know that I'm beyond repair at this point. Now what I have to figure out is how to live my life in a way that I don't create too much collateral damage for others, because I'm broken. And that's what I'm trying to figure out. So her voicemail picks up, and I literally said, "My name's Doug Hildreth. I'm just calling because if I don't leave a message, I'll probably never call you again." Click. And I literally hung up, and 5 minutes later my phone rang, and it was her, you know. And I said, "Yeah, I'm really struggling." She goes, "Well, great, let's get you in." And so we set an appointment. I think I went the next day or something. It was real quick. And I went in, and I had all the right intentions, man. I was going to go in and tell this woman exactly what had been going on in my life. And I got there, and then the problem was that now came the part where I had to actually be honest about my infidelity. And I had to be honest about the fact that really what I was a piece of shit, right? Because on paper, my actions equal piece of shit. At least they did in my head. And so I sit down, and I'm like, you know, I have had an affair with this one woman this one time. And that's how I tried to frame it, right? I wanted to frame it because I didn't want her to think I was a really bad guy. I just had this one thing that happened occasionally, on and off, for 7 years, right? And I remember trying to frame it this way so that she wouldn't think I was such a bad guy. Maybe she could help me figure out a way to solve it without her having to know the whole story. And I did that for 3 sessions. And by the end of the 3rd session, I couldn't take it anymore. And so I called her. I'll never forget it, man. I sat down with her because I had started to realize that I might be falling in love with somebody that was not my wife. And I sat down with her and I said, "I have to tell you the truth about me, because I've never told anybody the truth about me. But if you're going to make any decisions, you should know the whole truth and nothing but the truth. You should know who I really am, because I'm not lovable, right? And I'm certainly not somebody that you're going to want to get together with. And so I sat down with her and I told her the truth about me. I told her about the sex abuse as a child, and I told her about all the affairs that I had on my wife. I told her about the ongoing relationships and the secret messages and all the things and the way I had orchestrated this entire thing. And nobody knew about it. And I remember sitting there thinking, here it comes, she's going to tell me what I already know. And she looked at me and she said, I'm really hurt by the things that you've done and the choices that you've made. But I also can't help but just feel incredibly sorry for the things that you've experienced in your life. And I'd like to see what you're willing to do about it. And that is not what I expected to hear. That is not what I expected to receive from another human being. Because I didn't feel worthy of love. I didn't feel worthy of grace. And so I set up an appointment with that counselor that day, and I just told her the truth, man. I said, you know what, I got to talk to you. I got to tell you the truth about me. Everything I told you the first 3 sessions is bullshit. And I just laid it out there. I said, I was abused for years. I said, I've been having affairs ongoing for the last decade with numerous different people, and I'm pretty sure I'm fucking broken. And I just laid it out there, and I cried like I haven't cried in my life. And I remember her looking at me, and she goes, you're not broken. And I'm like, look, not dumb. I'm a pretty smart guy. I feel like I'm usually the smartest guy in the room. And I've been at this thing for a long time, for 10 years, trying to figure it out. I've been trying to think my way out of this. I've been trying to solve this for real for 10 years. And it's no better. It's actually the worst it's ever been. I'm pretty sure the only conclusion is I'm broken. And she goes, no, you're a trauma victim. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, what does my trauma have to do with this? Fast forward, right? A few weeks later, I get a message from this guy that's teaching you guys. Because, of course, everybody in Newburgh knows that my life has exploded. It's a small town. I own local businesses. Everybody knows who I am. And he says, hey, man, how are you doing? Well, Jory, not very good. How are you? And he goes, hey, can I come by and just chat with you for a little bit? I said, yeah, sure, man. Come on out. So he comes out to my house, and at this point, right, my wife had moved out, and I'm living in our house, raising our 2 children, and I have lawn chairs in my living room because I have no furniture left because everything's gone from the divorce. And my mattress was literally a mattress on the floor. It had a freaking hole in it. I'm not kidding you. I bought a $20 mattress off Craigslist, so I had something to sleep on, and you could only sleep on the edges. The damn thing was like a donut in the middle. And so he comes over, and I'm sitting in my living room in my pit of despair, is what I called it, because it was just the most depressing scene you could ever walk into. A grown man in a lawn chair in his living room, and I think you had to sit on boxes while we talked, or a coffee table or something, because I only had 1 lawn chair. I had no money. And so I just told him the truth. That was what I figured out, was that if I just told people the truth, no matter how they responded to me, right, I could begin to start to cope and begin to focus and face what I had done. I had to acknowledge it over and over again because I spent so many years lying about it. And so I was like, you know what, if people are going to walk out of my life because of the way I've been, 1, I deserve it, but 2, that's also their choice. But I shouldn't have false friendships, and I shouldn't have fake relationships anymore. And what I started learning was that the way people responded to me didn't have anything to do with the way I had lived my life, and it had everything to do with where they were at emotionally in theirs. And it was a really fascinating thing to start to pick up. It was a really interesting dichotomy in humans' relationships. And so we sat down and we started talking, and I told him, this is what's been going on, man. And I'll never forget it. He sits down and he goes, and he wrote the word trauma on a piece of paper, and he circled it. And he goes, so, from this, a lot of things tend to happen in people's lives. And so he starts drawing offshoots: substance abuse, right? Pornography addiction, sex addiction, anxiety, depression, criminality, all these things. And I'm like, watching this spider web grow, and I start realizing that my entire life was seated in trauma, even traumatizing myself through my own behavior. And I started realizing that the key and I mean this no disrespect to the 12-step programs, because they helped me find cessation and they helped me find a way to stay clean and sober. But the key wasn't in having a spiritual awakening. It was reckoning my trauma and reconciling with it and facing it. And that's what I did, man. And I mean it. Like, I went head on and I went hard into intensive therapy with my counselor, and we fucking hit trauma. And it hurt. I would show up every week to counseling, like armored up, and not in a bad way, not to protect myself, but ready to just take an emotional beating. Because what I knew was that I was dealing with stuff that I hadn't dealt with in 30 years. And what I was facing were things that I had covered up for decades of my life. And I was battling paradigms, right, that I had created, that I lived by, that I had to help build, deconstruct, and then rebuild. And it was this crazy process, man. And it was the most enlightening and empowering time of my life. You know, and that was it was 4 years ago now. Literally, 4 years ago was when that process started. And in that time, I have really just been blessed, to be perfectly honest. That's the best way to put it. My life has been rocketed into a different realm of compassion and love, and we have made deep connections with people, and we have really started doing work in this area, because there are so many people out there suffering from what I suffered from that have no fucking clue that there's a solution. That's why I'm here to talk to you guys. My story isn't about me. It has nothing to do with me. My story is about the field that you guys are in, and the lives that you're going to get to impact, and the people that you're going to interact with. See, I got really, really lucky that I landed in the lap of a trauma therapist when I was ready for help. There are very few people that make it to 10 years clean and sober having not dealt with the trauma of their life. So that's the other thing we're here to talk about today, right? Is that you guys are getting ready to go into a field where there's a 15% recovery rate. How's that acceptable? How is it that the best thing we've come up with is a 12-step program that was invented, 90 years ago? Why aren't we questioning that model? Right? That's what I learned. Not that there's anything wrong with it, because that model got me sober, and I still love it. I love going and seeing the people and connecting with them and being part of it. But what I see is there's a huge missing link, right? We need to realign that maybe the disease model is bullshit. Maybe the disease is mental health. Maybe the disease is trauma. That's for you guys to decide as you guys move from here, but I can tell you that my lived experience, and it's pretty vast at this point. I don't have any medical training. I have no scholastic training. I have graduate level experience in addiction, in abuse, in trauma. I have lived it my entire life, and I've walked with people through it for the last 16 years. Now, I get to tell people about what happens if we actually deal with it. And we get to pose some really fascinating questions about what happens if we shift the way we look at it. What happens if we change the way we treat it? That's some inspiring shit. And that's what you guys are going to get to do. You guys get to define the way this is dealt with going forward. And that's what I'm here to talk to you guys about. This is me, right? My life's an open book. I'm a case study. I'm a statistic at this point. But if I can talk to enough of you people, maybe we can change the way this thing's done, and maybe we can change the success rate. Maybe we can get a lot better than 85% fail rate. Because right now we're talking about an industry that in the next 4 years is going to be worth $53 billion. And we're cool with a 15% success rate. I am not cool with that. Because people like me are dying every single day because we don't even know that the help is there. We don't know that people like you are available to us. We don't know that help is out there. And we don't know that the process through it is entirely different than the one we're being sold. I'm open for questions. Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you guys being willing to let me share my story with you. It's a lot. Yes, sir.
I'm curious about, well, I guess my question is, could there have been any intervention that would have had a positive impact on you before being arrested? So,
You know,
the clients that we work with that
yeah.
maybe aren't at that stage yet,
Mhm.
you know, what can we do?
So I actually did, my parents did do an intervention on me at one point, with a few people from the 12-step program. They showed up and did an intervention on me. It did not help, to be perfectly honest. Honestly, it just scared me to go run further away. That's what it did. That was the impact it had on me. I went into the, how can I end this as quickly as possible mode, right? Because for me, when I'm not healthy, a lie does not like to be challenged, right? I don't like to be challenged when I'm lying. So for me, if I know that you don't know the truth, then I can just back you right the hell down. But if I do know that you know the truth, then I'm really good at being extremely gracious and acquiescent to whatever you want. So for me, it was, yeah, I think it's a great idea. I really see where you guys are coming from, and I'm definitely gonna hook up with this guy as my sponsor, and I'm just gonna get right to work.
Intervention, I guess, is some, like, inside baseball. I just mean, is there anything that could have changed your path?
Ooh, I don't think so. I mean, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this stuff. I've had a lot of time to think about this stuff, and I don't think that there was anything that was gonna change where I was headed. I was like an out-of-control freight train at that point, and I think it took getting hit between the eyes like that. I think it took a catastrophic failure for me to even realize what was going on. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
If you had known about like therapy as an option that could help, what would it have taken to convince you to like seek that out, or would it have taken that kind of, for you at least?
So for me, it took being desperate.
Really, yeah.
Right? I knew it was available. She'd actually mentioned it to me like years before, and I blew it off. She actually made me sit down and watch the Brene Brown TED Talk on shame. And I haven't had many moments in my life of more physical uncomfortability with emotion. I was like, oh, you know, like doing one of those in my chair, like, Jesus, how do we get this over with? Now, let me point it to you this way though. Because I went through 3 inpatient treatment centers before I ever got clean and sober. What if when I went into those inpatient treatment centers, somebody talked to me about trauma? Could it have made a difference then? I don't know, but I know that it couldn't have hurt. Yeah, hold on, we got 2 guys in the back. Go with you on the right. I think you were up first.
Right?
Yeah, my right.
Come back to me because I just lost.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's interesting because you kind of answered my question. I was going to ask about like the role of inpatient rehab and treatment, because it didn't sound like that was even part of your recovery.
Well, it wasn't.
Right. So that's why I was like, man, yeah.
Yeah. So I went to an inpatient rehab center and relapsed the day I got out, man. I did 28 days in inpatient rehab and rocked it. I was the fucking cheerleader and the poster child for it, and I relapsed the day I got out. So for me, I have a huge shtick against the way that they're set up right now, because I believe they're designed for failure. It's like the old school gym models. They're designed for failure. They're designed for non-use. They just want customers. And my thought is that what if instead of having this generalized plan, right, that we just say, okay, well, they're a drug addict, so here's the program, right? We're going to put them in their groups 3 days a week. We'll give them their group counselor. We'll get them through the first few steps, and then we'll give them their big book, and we'll shoot them out. What if we actually did an intervention or a intake assessment on somebody and found out what they needed, and asked them real questions about their life, and then designed a treatment plan based upon the experience that they'd lived? What would happen then if we had individualized treatment programs designed for people based on their lived experience, not our own assumptions? That's what I think. That's why I don't really talk about my inpatient treatment experience much, because I didn't get anything out of it.
Yeah. And it's kind of horrifying to me to know that that wasn't just like a standard part of that experience. Like
Shocking, right?
Yeah, well, like I mean, I've said it a million times in this class already. Like I was working as a tech at a rehab before coming here, and I mean, to be fair, there was a specific mental health focus there,
Sure.
and they had a psychiatrist and a psychologist on retainer to help out with this kind of things on top of counselors, and it was also a smaller place. It wasn't like a bigger institution where they do just kind of herd people in and out. So like, yeah, that's kind of gut wrenching. No.
Yeah, even on a micro scale though, right? You could start a small treatment center and have a small practice, and if you were willing to stay within the bounds of what you could treat correctly, you could do it.
Right.
You could roll out an individualized treatment program for people and meet with them individually and have weekly sessions and make a real difference versus saying, well, we do have a counselor on staff and we have a psychologist, and well, if we need them, we use them. We do need them. Why don't we use them? What we suffer from is mental illness, right? That's what we suffer from. We suffer from emotional trauma. We suffer from abuse. That's what we're suffering from. We're suffering from emotional pain. And we're giving people a book and a set of 12 steps and saying, well, you just should pray about it and call your sponsor. And when it gets really hard, make sure you help somebody else just like you. Well, how the fuck do I help somebody else just like me? I don't know how to help me. I know how to stop. I figured that out. How do I stay stopped? And how do I stay stopped and not be a shitty person? That's the real question. How do I stay stopped and become a better human being? How do I make the world a better place? How do I actually contribute to society? Because I wasn't, man. I thought I was, and I made people think that I was, but it was bullshit. It was all just to build up my ego. Right? And if that's the best we're getting, and if people like me are making it a long period of time, how many people are just dying? How many people aren't getting help?
I wanted to start off by saying thank you for sharing, and also you're super pumped to go facilitate some healing.
I love it.
So very inspired. I'm actually at an inpatient facility right now.
Okay.
It's 28 days, military, and we do a lot of substance use and chemical dependency stuff. And I do these intakes, and I see all of this stuff, right, that I want to treat, the trauma, the mood stuff. And the system that I'm in has some pushback, like, yeah, there's room for that, but also, you can't do that work until you're sober. And I was curious what I struggle with that, and I have a hard time finding, like, is my goal, stability so we can get you back out, so then you can do the work in outpatient. It sounds like trauma is the root and substance is a symptom or a result. So just what are your thoughts on kind of like
Bingo.
The systems?
Right? Why are we treating causes, not conditions?
And that's
I say that all the
right?
time. Why would we treat a symptom of it, right? That'd be like if I got a gunshot wound and you were like, well, we're gonna throw a Band-Aid on that.
Mm-hmm.
No. We have to get into the wound and clean it out, right? Causes, not conditions. We can't treat the symptoms anymore. And the thing is that if we just shift the perspective, and that's what I'm not saying everybody's got it wrong. I'm just saying they're looking at it from the wrong angle.
Right.
That's my opinion, right? I could be wrong. I don't think I am. I don't think I am, and I would think it would be hard pressed to find anybody who could argue coherently against my lived experience and what I've seen in the world with addiction and addiction therapy and trauma at this point. I think that there's a guy over here teaching you guys that agrees with me wholeheartedly, or I wouldn't be here. Right? And so I love that's just it. Why aren't we treating the actual root cause? And the reality of it is that we don't treat the root cause because we believe it's really expensive. And that cuts into profit margins. And I hate to say it that way, but it's the truth of it. So this industry, right, that's currently a $44 billion industry, operates at a 50% profit margin. That is insanely high. The average treatment center, even the shitty ones, operate at 30% margins. So yes, there is a lot of people out there who are just like you, who want to help people, and you take the job because you want to make a difference in people's lives, but you get hamstrung by the system you're in. And we're going to stick with this model because it's a hell of a lot cheaper to treat 45, 50, 90, 100 patients with this program that we know, hey, it works 15% of the time and it's fine, it's accepted. Insurance companies will pay for it, and if they really want it, they'll get it. They'll get sober. Why would we change it? What if we can make 30% margins and save 30% of people's lives? Treat causes, not conditions. Did you have a question, Matt?
Yes, back. During your trauma treatment, did your urges, and I hate to use this word,
Yeah.
urge to relapse, for lack of a better
Yeah.
word, change at all versus before that?
Yeah, it turns out, here's a couple things. One, I'll just be honest, I do have a very high sex drive, but it turns out I don't have to have sex all the time when I'm in an emotionally stable place and when I'm in an emotionally healthy relationship. I don't even have to look at porn. Guess what? Unless I want to. How crazy is that? We could do that together if we want. I'm gonna embarrass my wife right now. But we get to make those choices right around our sexuality. That's what was so crazy to me. Was I thought, okay, this is gonna be a lot like my recovery from drugs and alcohol, and I'm gonna have to start with this huge period of cessation, and then I'm gonna have to figure out how to slowly sprinkle sex back into my life. Well, it turns out we're human beings, and we have our own desires, and we have our own natural proclivity to sexual activity. And so for me, it was a real process of trying to sort out, like, is this an unhealthy urge or is this a natural inclination, right? And learning how to then literally monitor my emotions and my feelings around it. Talk about them openly, journal them. That's one thing, man, I will tell you what, my wife is quiet, she's very shy most of the time, she's probably vibrantly red under that mask right now because I'm talking about her. But I can talk to that woman about anything. How I'm feeling, what I'm thinking about, what my urges are. Literally, I can be very honest with her. And then we can sort out what is healthy and is not in them. And so that's been big for me, is that I don't, right? Like, I don't have urges. What I have is I have natural instincts and desires. And sometimes I have unhealthy instincts, right? I do, especially when I'm in a bad place emotionally. When I'm struggling, guess what comes back? I want to do things like watch porn and distract myself, right? I wouldn't mind having a risque conversation with somebody because that distracts me from what I'm really feeling. Because the porn, the sex, is a symptom. It's not the cause of the problem now. So yeah, so that's been the coolest discovery, to be perfectly honest, is to get the freedom from that bondage, but also to get the freedom with somebody that you're in a trusting and healthy relationship with, to explore those things and find out what you're okay with, what you're not, what you're comfortable with, what's okay, what's healthy. Like, it's been a really surreal last 4 years. Yeah.
Double dipping.
I love it.
I have a couple, I steal that from 12-step meetings. It's not, did it that here too?
Say that again?
If you share like more than one.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Double dipping.
We got a bunch of you.
So, let's see. So 2 very different questions.
Okay.
So please take your time or answer them at your leisure. But I wanted to know what your thoughts are on inpatient treatment, and whether that's something that someone at rock bottom needs, if they feel like they're going out of control, or if that's something manageable in outpatient. And then I also wanted to know what processing your trauma has been like in your family and reconnecting with your abusers, if that's happened.
Sure.
And if that's too
So
sensitive.
yeah, so no, it's not too sensitive. If it is, right, then I'm not ready. I'm not doing the work. To be perfectly honest, we have to get to a place where we're ready to talk about this stuff. And if you want to lead on a subject and be somebody that pioneers in something, you better be ready to answer some tough questions. So, inpatient treatment, I'm a huge proponent for it if done correctly, right? Because I know for me that when I was spiraling out of control, now once I was sober, totally different, right? Just dealing with my trauma, I still functioned in the world and at a high level, right? Like, I owned a business, we own multiple businesses. I still did all of those things every single day. I just also was sleeping with people every second of every day when I wasn't working. So for me though, but when I was abusing substances, I was out of control. I couldn't keep a job, right? I was homeless, like I said. So for me at that point, being somewhere safe where I could get cessation as well as some clarity and some safety would be vital. And I think that eventually that will be the model, especially if we translate, like she's talked about, to treating the causes, right, and not the symptom. Because if you put people in a really safe place, think about what kind of work you could do with a person if you had them for 28 days and you got to actually work on what was wrong. How powerful would that be? Because you know they're there, they're willing. I mean, I was willing to do the work. You don't go and stay at a treatment center because you don't want to be there. You stick around because you're fucking desperate to catch something that might change it for you, right? And so, second question, you said reconnecting.
Yeah, like what was that part of your trauma processing to connect with them? Is that something you decided to do? And
So, one of my abusers has passed away before I ever got to a place where I was ready to deal with it. The other one is still alive and is not a part of my life. And that was my own personal choice not to reconnect. To be perfectly honest, I have, it just is what it is. And I mean this, the sad part of that is that he was abused just like I was. And so part of me just feels a shit ton of pity for him. And I know that he's a sick human being. And I know that he needs help just like I needed help. Now he chose to let his manifest in a different way. And his behaviors are not excusable by any means. And I don't think that they are. But I also know that he was just dealing with the way he felt in the way he was showed how to deal with how he felt. I chose to outlet it in a different way, right? It doesn't mean that what he did was okay. And I sure as fuck do not align with that type of behavior or think that there's any part of him that I want to reconnect with. Does that make sense?
absolutely.
You know, I had another family member of mine, you know, this is sad to say, was my grandma, who was an enabler of all that behavior. She died yesterday, literally.
Oh my gosh.
And I don't know how I feel about all of that still. You know, my family all rallied to go down and be there. And I loved my grandma because she always loved me. But my grandma also enabled somebody to do the most heinous thing someone could do to another person willingly. And so for me, it was it's just been a super mixed bag of emotions the last couple of days, to be perfectly honest. At some moments, you know, I think, God, how sad is it that she had to live her life, right, in kind of in exile the last 5 years of her life in a nursing home, basically on her own, alone, to a large degree. And then part of me thinks, got what you deserved, right? And I hate to say it so callously, but it's just tough on an emotional level. That's still something I'm going to sort through. Yeah, I can say 24 hours removed, I literally don't know how I feel. What I hope is that she did pass in peace, and I mean that, and I hope that she found some sense of forgiveness in herself. Because I know what I carried with me. And I didn't ever sexually abuse anybody, but I know how much guilt and shame I carried for the way I behaved. And nobody needs to walk around with that kind of pain inside them. It's awful.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
What were the best ways you found to clean out that pain? You said it was like a rock on your chest. Was the therapy and talking about it, was that bringing it back up in a safe space with someone?
That was probably the most profound way, truly, to deal with it, because they're just such big emotions, right? Such big feelings. To really sit down in a room with them, and I call it opening up the kimono, right? Like literally just let yourself be totally vulnerable. I mean, I would much rather just be naked with another person than actually deal with my feelings. You know, and that's easier for me. That's less vulnerable. But that's what I think of it as. And it really was. It was sitting down and talking about it. For me, it's also been journal. Like I carry a journal with me at all times. Sometimes I write my crazy ideas down in them. Sometimes I write down thoughts. But sometimes when I'm really struggling, I literally will just sit down and start writing how I'm feeling. Because it helps me. I've learned to get it out in front of me so I can examine it, right? And sometimes it's not necessarily that I need to be with a therapist at this point. I definitely did in the beginning because I couldn't think my way through it. But now it just helps to get it out, and so I can examine it and see. And sometimes it's just sitting down with her and going, hey, I wrote this out. Will you take a look at this and tell me what you're seeing? Like, will you read this and just tell me what you're getting from this? Because for me, it's just about education. Like there's nothing harmful left. I don't have any secrets left. So now it's literally just about education. I'm learning from myself and learning how to remap and feel and get through all of this stuff. So it's really just about education. But yeah, for me, it was sitting in a room in a safe place and being able to share with somebody the weight of the pain, you know.
Yeah, thank you again for sharing all this stuff.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, I know you talked a lot about kind of your family system and growing up, and your daughters were a significant reason
Yeah.
you made this final big shift.
Mhm.
I'm curious how you noticed your growth and change impacting your relationship with them and how you're understanding yourself as like a parent.
Yeah, so my daughters are awesome. And I think that they help me be a better human being, to be perfectly honest. It's been a really cool journey. So I'm super sensitive, and I mean that. That's like obviously, duh. I'm an incredibly emotional person. So I think I was meant to raise girls. So I connect very well with both of my daughters. I mean, they're my team, and they're my girls. And so for us, it's been really cool. You know, my oldest is 13 now, and my youngest is 10, and we really do have a pretty awesome dynamic, and they're both very different. My oldest one is very much like me. She's highly anxious, very fearful, you know, very emotional all the time. And my youngest is, I think, the best parts of me, you know, like she's very outgoing and dynamic, and she's very funny. But what's cool is like they always joke and they say like, well, you're like our mom and our dad, right? Because they can talk to me about whatever. And I think, and I'll say that, like, I think I'm the coolest dad because I don't get weirded out by my daughter. Like my 13-year-old is starting to grow boobs, you know, and she's so uncomfortable about the fact that she had to get bras. Thank God we have a stepmom that's amazing, right, in their life and can be there for that stuff. But at the same time, they also know they can talk to dad. And I mean that. Like, we connect, we sit down, we talk about how we feel. That's one thing that I make available to my kids is we talk about how we feel. I tell them how I feel. I tell them what I'm dealing with. They know about my story. My kids know 100%. Like, I don't tell them, oh, well, you know, your mommy and your daddy got divorced because they just couldn't figure things out. My kids know why. We have a podcast. We actually talk about it on our podcast. And I mean that openly about my lived experience. I have a blog. I write all about it because I think it's so important to just acknowledge the truth. They're not dumb. Right? My kids are really smart, and the reality of it is that they need to be aware that these kind of things exist in the world so that they can learn how to process and deal with it, because they had to walk through a divorce, you know, and that's a brutal thing for a young child to walk through. Everything that you think you know is taken, right? Everything's flipped upside down. And so for me, it was really important to give them power and give them a say in as much as I could, because they needed to be able to share where they were at, you know. And there were times, man, in the beginning where, like, my oldest daughter was angry, you know, and pissed off about the things that were going on, and she needed to be, you know, she needed to learn how to let that stuff out. And I think that for us, it's really helped us grow and have a much stronger connection.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
So kind of shifting gears a little bit, you talked about how the existing systems are unhelpful, which is something we've been talking in this class about.
Weird.
But you have, I can see that you're very passionate about it, and that you also have kind of a unique perspective that we haven't gotten yet on like the business side of things and things like that. So I was kind of hoping you could talk a little bit more about that. I see that your kind of method has been to bring exposure to the areas that the system is lacking.
Absolutely.
Talks like this and maybe the podcast and things like that. But do you have any other advice for what we might do in the system, like how to change the system?
Yeah. I mean, what we've talked about is we want to just combat them directly, right? So for you guys, start your own treatment center, right? Go out, spend some time in the field, and learn absolutely what does work and watch what doesn't, and then build something that does, right? That's what we've done with all of our businesses. We exist in the fields. We exist in two totally opposing industries, right? We own a gym and we own a car dealership. And all we did was build our framework off of what doesn't work in each industry. And we're very successful doing that. Because what's missing is what will make you different than everybody else. And right now, it's not like you can't do any worse. And I hate to say it that way. Right? The best we've come up with since June 10th, 1935 is go to meetings. That's the best we've done. Now, obviously, when it gets to a point where you need help, they say, well, you're going to need outside help for that. But that's the best we've come up with, is a 15% fail rate. So for me, it's design something that exists in the exact same industry and directly confronts their misconceptions and their missing links, because that's how you disrupt an industry.
Are you pointing to Halo?
Yes. I am. I am the Starbucks of treatment centers, right? They're everywhere, but their coffee's still shitty.
You want to tell them some of the ideas that we've been talking with Steve?
Yeah, so we have talked about this, right? I mean, we want to start a treatment center, right? And that's the main goal. I love, and I mean this, I love working with people at the gym, and I love what we do in the auto industry, and I mean that. I love leading teams. It's great work, and I love working with people, especially now that I'm actually capable of being a real leader. But I don't feel that my life is best suited and going to be best used in the auto industry or in the fitness industry. I believe that it's going to be best suited meeting with people like you and meeting with people like me and finding a medium where we can meet together, right? And so we've talked about starting a treatment center that's based on trauma therapy, right? So we start treating the cause, not the symptoms, and we actually start utilizing a treatment program that's individually designed so that people can recover. That's the whole goal, man. And literally start small. You can start scalable. It doesn't have to be a big operation. You just have to start small, build it, prove that it works, which I don't think is going to be that hard, because even if we're hitting at 15%, we're crushing it. Okay? That's the thing. So you're not even in, like, you're in an industry where if you guys bat 25%, you're going to change the game. Think about that. You'll change the way people are treated with mental health for the rest of their lives. You guys can literally alter the course of an industry. And it's an industry that hasn't been disrupted in almost 95 years. Think about that. Nobody questions it. Nobody even tries. So we've talked a lot about it. I genuinely believe there's huge room for disruption, especially as this industry continues to balloon, right? We're the most social species in world history, and we're more isolated than we ever have been. The use rates are skyrocketing in just America, but around the world because of COVID, because we're shut off from each other. Because the one thing that human beings crave most, even though we might be introverts, even though we might not want to be in the room with people, is connection. We're herders by nature. That's what we do. We find our tribe, we find our herd, and we connect. Some of us like really big tribes, some of us like small ones, but we just desperately desire connection, and we fucking don't have it, right? And social media is ruining it. It's distancing us even more, right? Political parties are widening the gap. Look around, because the field you guys are in is going to be the most prevalent in the next 2 to 3 decades, because people are fucking hurting, and they're going to start dying in droves because nobody knows how to treat this stuff, because nobody's equipped to ask, how are you doing, and know what the fuck to do when you give them a real answer, right? That's the point of this. It's so important. It's for the breadth of people's lives. So when you ask, what do you do? Go into the field, figure out what does work, look at what doesn't, and then punch it in the face.
It's a good takeaway for today.
Yeah. So when Jory gives you something that doesn't work, punch him right in the face.
Thank you.
It's okay, Jory. I didn't tell you that like we were, so I want
It needs a reset.
It does. And even extensions of it. I mean,
Yes.
you work at Providence, you're treating symptoms.
Exactly.
You go to a methadone clinic, you're treating.
Mhm.
You go to a eating disorder clinic.
Right. That's just it. We're not talking about just drugs and alcohol. We're talking about mental illness, because the majority of it does stem from trauma. And that's what we're starting to find out. And there are people out there that are talking about this. Understand that. There are therapists in the world that get it, but they're old. And I mean that. These are dudes that are 60 and 70, Gabor Mate, right? Like, there are guys out there that are figuring this stuff out and making these connections, but they're at a point in their lives where they can't advance the cause any further. So it's up to us to just lead the charge, right? But that's just it. It's anorexia, it's bulimia, right? It's depression, it's anxiety. It's not just substance abuse. It's people sitting in penitentiaries, right? Why aren't we asking them how they're doing? Why aren't we going in there and treating their trauma? Because kids don't grow up just being bad, man. Some are different, that's for sure. But if we sit down and ask somebody how they're doing and we really dig in, it's pretty amazing the difference we can make in people's lives. It's pretty amazing the difference it's made in my life. So yeah, absolutely. The room for expansion is almost limitless when you guys think about it in that regard. So whatever you feel like you're going to specialize in, the field's still woefully behind. I'm sure they read all the books, right? Like The Body Keeps the Score, When the Body Says No, all of those books, right? Like they're touching on, those guys are touching on those things. Everybody's starting to make the connection, and I feel like we're just literally just a shift in focus away from saving millions of lives. And it feels like it's worth it to try.
And George Fox is changing. I remember when I was interviewing at a hospital many years ago to work there, the training director said, we don't hire George Fox students because they don't get outside of the bubble.
A little conservative, maybe?
Yeah. They only want Yavis clients. You guys know what Yavis means?
Wait, what?
Yavis? Do you know that term? It's an older term for psychotherapy patients, young, attractive, verbal, intellectual, I forget the S's. Like
Don't use the S word.
sophisticated. But that's like an older expression, kind of a psychodynamic term that you would always want Yavis clients because they pay well, they're attractive, they're bright, they're intellectual, and it's true. Most psychologists kind of seek out those patients, and that's kind of the knock on George Fox. Because those are the best types of patients, but to seek out the ugly, the unattractive, the addicted, the broken, the homeless.
The homeless, yeah.
And George Fox is changing that, particularly the last 10 years. Seek out more of this kind of stuff. You know, the dogs.
There's more of me.
Right. Because they're everywhere.
Than the Yavises.
I've seen 20 walk by the last 10 minutes.
Yeah.
That gives me hope. I mean, you can see these students, they're hungry.
Yeah.
We actually, this is a side note, we actually had a guest speaker come in, I think 2 years ago for one of the colloquium or whatever, but she was involved in implementing trauma-informed care within school systems.
Yeah.
And yeah, she's actually been implementing that in at least the Tiger and Tualatin school district, I'm aware of that. But it was really awesome to have that perspective kind of at the beginning of our time here at George Fox. And I really feel like the more and more classes I take, the more I realize how prevalent this is in every field, not just.
That was Amy Strober.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big deal, right? Especially in schools. I mean, have you guys read any of Mark Brackett's work? So he's the director of the Center for Emotional Intelligence at Yale. And he created an entire system that they're implementing now in grade schools for kids to learn how to deal with and identify their feelings.
Wow.
And it's brilliant stuff. So if you guys get a chance, check him out. But it's stuff just like that. That's what you guys are dealing with. It's like I said, like that's preventative care. So think about what happens if we start educating children on how to deal with their feelings and we start teaching them how to process their emotions. What if we start reducing the consumption rates of alcohol and drugs in our society? What if we start reducing the addiction rates and increasing the recovery rates? What does that do for society? What does that do for humanity? You're not talking about making a small difference. If you can shift it in both directions, you're talking about changing the world. And that's an exciting thing to talk about, right? That's what you go to school for. That's what you get into these fields for, because you want to make a difference in the world. The cool thing is you guys are in a field where you can actually do it. You can actually make that effect.
And it's sad because most psychologists, you bring up the word addiction, they punt you out.
Yes.
They say, I don't treat that.
Yeah.
Trauma, that's not my specialty.
Right.
And these guys are learning, early. You can't teach old dogs like me trauma, it's really hard. Cause we're too involved in the field, too entrenched.
You're too evolved.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right.
There's a different word for that. It's archaic. Right, but I mean, that's the thought process, and it really is. You guys think it's not, but it really is the thought process you get met with in a lot of the world. Is that people think that their specialty is the thing they need to focus on, and that's fine. If you want to specialize in addiction therapy, if you want to specialize in eating disorders, if you want to specialize in obesity, right, and weight loss, if you want to specialize in trauma, that's fine. But understand, start looking for where that behavior came from. That's the key. It's that simple. And I think that's why it's been so easily overlooked, because it's easy to treat the symptoms and say, okay, well, we're doing pretty good. It's like taking Advil for a headache. The problem is, if the headache persists, right, you don't just keep taking Advil. There's something else going on. It's just like in the gym, man. The muscle hurts. You don't just keep doing the same thing. You don't just stop using the muscle. We have to figure out what's going on with the muscle. Why isn't it functioning the way we want it to function? Same thing with the human organism. Why isn't it functioning the way it's designed to function? It's that simple. It's at 6 inches between our ears.
Other questions?
Anybody else? You solved it? I love it. I think the biggest thing I can leave you guys with is it's really easy to get motivated and inspired in an hour or two conversation. But it's finding the will and the passion to keep going when we leave the room. And I mean that. It's finding that no matter fucking what, we're not gonna stop until we make a difference in the world attitude. And that's what you guys have to have, because you're in a field that desperately needs change and has wildly avoided even attempting to make any for a long time. We've made no advancements for a really long time, right? We still look to the old guys and we read their work as a basis of how we guide ourselves. And it's fine to look back to learn lessons, but we need to live life looking forward and trying to figure out better ways to affect change in the world. So for you guys, find that passion to wake up every single day and explore a little bit more. And then don't fall into the trap of thinking you're going to fix it in a week or two, or a month or a year or 5 years or 10. You have to understand that adaptation takes time. And you have to be willing to put in the work, and you have to be willing to eat, I hate to say it, miles of shit to get to where you're trying to go. But if it means enough to you, it will be worth it. And it will change people's lives. Even if you affect it in a small community, you can literally change people's lives. And there are very few people that are going to college that are getting ready to go out into the professional world that have the ability to impact the world like you guys do. So take it seriously, because you guys are the future. So find that motivation. I don't care where it comes from, whatever your internal passion is, and pursue it, man, relentlessly. Because that's what we do now. We pursue it relentlessly because it's so vital that we keep talking about it. So vital.
Any last questions?
Thank you guys very much
Yeah.
for having me.
Thank you, Doug.
Appreciate it.